Hello everybody, and welcome to the whichenglish.com video interview. Today we have the best-selling author NM Gwynne with us, with his talking about his book Gwynne's Grammar. Welcome, Gwynne, or Mr. Gwynne rather. What would you like to be called, NM Gwynne or Mr. Gwynne?
Well, it depends. My pupils call me Mr. Gwynne, but people, what you might call in an equal situation, this is a good reason, they usually call me Neville.
Neville.
Which is the first of my two names.
Okay, so if you don't mind, I'll call you...
What used to be called Christian names, I think they're now called first names.
That's right. Okay, so first of all, maybe just if you could tell us a little bit about you and your background, and how did this all come about?
How far do you want to go back? I mean, where I was at school and so on, or how far do you want to go back?
Oh, just generally, what the brief summary of how you ended up becoming an author of Gwynne's Grammar.
Well, I was given in those days it was the best education. I wouldn't send a child there now at Eton and then at Oxford, and then not knowing what to do next, I spent 3 years qualifying as a chartered accountant. And then I was lucky enough to join a whizzy business just starting up called Slater Walker, which within about 3 or 4 years has become the sort of happening of its time, rather like Microsoft is today. And then I left that to start up my own public company based in Australia as chairman and chief executive. And I was lucky, I just hit it right, and I was lucky enough to make quite a lot of money. And I sold out about 15 years later, around about 1983. And then wasn't earning any money again, and gradually all the money one makes, if you're not earning money, it sort of runs out. And so I started teaching locally in Ireland, so both children and adults. I reckoned I could sort of cover every subject. And my youngest was sort of almost kindergarten children. And then a sort of miracle happened. A very rich American who heard I was, amongst other things, a historian, wanted his 8 children, it became 9 children those days, homeschooled in California. And he wanted me to teach this. And he'd fly this person over to teach them Latin, that person teach them Greek, and so on and so forth. And he flew me over to discuss whether I should teach them Latin. And out of interest, I tested them to see how much Latin and Greek they knew, which they'd been studying for sort of 5 or 6 years.
Yep.
I gave them the simplest sentences I could think of in both cases. We love the girls, translate that into Latin and Greek. They couldn't do any of them. And so I said to the father, you may be hiring professor this and professor that to teach your children all these things, but they're actually not learning anything. And what you better do is make me a headmaster, and I'll run the school from Ireland, because he showed me how you could use a computer, like we're using it now.
Yep.
And after first being pretty cross at that, he then agreed, and I became headmaster of the school, which I ran from Ireland, using the computer, and with 2 or 3 teachers underneath me who did what I said. And then it wasn't taking up all my time, so I looked around for things, sort of same sort of thing to do in England. And I started with the family of someone called Toby Young, who's a best-selling author and also a Spectator, columnist and Spectator. And he introduced me to Tom Hodgkinson, who is now the founder of the Ida Academy, and in those days was a successful journalist and author. And he was so fascinated by the English grammar I was teaching his children in order to teach them Latin grammar, none of which he knew, even though he's a sort of a world-selling author.
Yep.
He said, put all this into a book, we'll call it Gwynne's Grammar, and we'll publish it. And so the book wasn't my idea, and the title wasn't my idea. The next thing that happened was that ebury Press of the Random House Group noticed, and they liked the tone of voice, and they said, well, can we publish another edition of it? So we both said yes. And so they then put together, I expanded it a bit.
So how long ago was this then, that ebury published?
The press of March of this year.
Okay, yeah.
They published that book, I think April the 19th or something. And I don't believe they knew what was going to happen to it. I did not dream of it. But it's taken off, and today, still after 16 weeks, it's, as I told you a bit earlier, it's number 5 in the Sunday Times hardback bestsellers list, and in the Telegraph online bookshop, it's number 2 in hardback, number 2 in non-fiction, and number 2 in all categories. And it's a textbook, and it's never happened to a textbook before. And I sort of can hardly believe it's happened. It's certainly an incredibly exciting thing that's happened in my life.
Yeah, well, I mean, I did have a look on Amazon just before we connected, and it's #1 in the language and grammar, so you're definitely up there. So that's doing well. So if we then, why is grammar important then? If we move on to that, in your opinion?
See, there's a bit of a story on this one.
Yep.
Throughout the entire recorded history of education, which is 2,500 years, grammar, and I will explain why in a second, was always regarded as the primary, most important, fundamental subject that you did before anything else. And that's what you started with. And everything else depended on that. And in England, the top, when the schools, the best schools came because like Winchester and Eton, so they were actually called grammar schools. All the leading schools were called grammar schools because if you learned nothing else, you had to learn your grammar. And the reason is this. Words are, obviously what we communicate with, but also what we think with. Without words, we cannot think a coherent, straightforward thought. We can react, we can feel hungry, thirsty, and so on, but we actually can't think things out. And words are divided, as you use them, into two categories. One is vocabulary, which is what words mean. And obviously, the more words you know, and the more exactly you know their meaning, the richer your power of communicating and thinking is.
Yep.
And the other thing is how you use the words, how you put them together. You've got to put them in a sort of proper order and use them in a proper way in order to make sense of words. You can't just reel off words out of a dictionary and make sense of them. And that's all grammar is. So grammar is how you use words in order to think and how you use words in order to communicate. Now, if you don't know your grammar, your thinking is going to be either mushy or fuzzy or straightforward wrong, inevitably. It's like any other science. You've actually got to know it exactly. Yeah. If you get your grammar wrong and therefore your thinking wrong, since all your decisions are based on your thinking things through, you're going to get some of your decisions wrong. Sometimes this will be a nuisance, but sometimes it will be catastrophic. And it cause you lifetime unhappiness to get a really bad decision. And so what I'm really saying to everybody is that ultimately your happiness, the satisfyingness of your life, your success depends primarily on grammar. It's worse than that, because enough people taking bad decisions through ill thought out decisions that affects the whole society, and of course every person in society, and enough societies. Well, society collectively know what civilization is. Therefore, ultimately, individual happiness and success and the whole of civilization depends on grammar. How's that for a bit of logical reason?
That's good. That's good. So
it couldn't be more important, could it? It's the ultimate important thing: how to think, how to communicate.
Exactly, and which is where your book comes in. Then, so how can your book help people bridge that gap or fill that void?
Well, the thing is, you see, grammar, as I said, was taught as a primary subject until I left school. Then suddenly, without any proper consultation, either with other teachers or with parents, it was officially wiped out as a subject for examinations and to be taught at school. And was actually sort of child abuse to be teaching grammar school. So having spent 2,500 years, whatever it was, being the primary subject, it then became a non-subject. Now, this actually means that children are being, so to speak, brought up unable to think the way they ought to be able to think, and unable, therefore, because everything you do depends on thinking, unable to do anything the way they ought to be able to do it and used to be able to do it. And where my book comes, the other thing is that now, even if Mr. Gray manages to try and bring back grammar, which against protests of top academics he's trying to do, I don't see how he's going to succeed, because there are no teachers now left of my sort of age who themselves were taught grammar in the systematic way it had been taught for 2,500 years. But there's a principle of teaching you can only actually teach as you yourself were taught. I mean, a good teacher was someone who imitated the best teachers who taught him or her, and then added his or her individual style to that imitation. Well, now, there's now no teacher left who has taught grammar properly. And so we face a fairly dire situation. Now, what my grammar does, which no other grammar book does, but no other grammar book ever needed to, was not only teach you what grammar you ought to learn in order to be able to think and communicate properly, but also how to teach it. And that no other grammar book has ever touched before, as I say, because it wasn't necessary, because every teacher knew how to teach it.
Yep. And I see you've also incorporated a lot of Strunk and White, which I've got a copy of here. You've incorporated that into there. Tell me a little bit about that decision and.
Well, it's not actually Strunk and White. It's Strunk. What happened with Strunk is I think it was around about 1900. He produced his brilliant sort of 20-page textbook, which he used to use to teach his children. It was sort of amateurly put together, but absolutely brilliant. And then about 20 or 30 years later, the London group thought this was a shame, we must actually sort of publish it properly. And they got one of his pupils, White, E.B. White, I think his initials are, to do a very nice edition of it. And he produced a much, much expanded edition, which is the Strunk and White, whatever it's called, Elements of Style or something like that. And I've just gone back to the original, partly because there's no copyright problems, which they would do as Strunk and White, but also because it's shorter and neater. And what Strunk does is what I do not do in the grammar part of my book. He actually says, okay, now you know your grammar, here's how to develop a really good style and to avoid the obvious traps and so on, like that. So, it's an ideal follow-up to the pure grammar section, which is my book.
Okay, and
it sort of couldn't be done better. I mean, if I wanted to do as well as White, Strunk, I would pretty well have to imitate what he did. So
that's right. It's nice and concise. So speaking of traps and pitfalls, what are some if we talk about grammar generally, what are some common areas of error that you see people making?
Goodness, well, there are so many of them, it's jolly difficult to sort of single them out. And many of them don't matter, but are just sort of inelegant. I mean, the thing one's got to remember about English is it's one of the three great languages in all history. There's classical Greek, sort of foundation of all, classical Latin, which sort of developed from the Greek, and then English, which is a combination of Anglo-Saxon, that's original German, plus French, because they grew up side by side, because at one stage French was the language of polite society, and then plus Latin, there were a whole lot of Latinism. So it's about three different languages, English, and it's got incredible richness, subtlety, and power. And it's a language in which the greatest modern literature has been written, the greatest scientific discoveries have been set out in, and the greatest poetry has been written, and so on and so forth. It's a language you don't want to mess around with, unless to improve. Now, in English, since it really started being a written language, which we say is about 1485, the vocabulary has obviously changed quite a lot, because as and when new concepts have been needed, you've produced words to use. Like, for instance, the word bungalow, when you need a bungalow, you've got a word from India. The word television, you've got a word partly from Latin, partly from Greek. So the vocabulary has been added to hugely. But the grammar has never changed. The grammar was regarded as pretty well perfect. I think the grammar we use today is the same as it was in 1485. It's scarcely a change. And so what I am out to do is to keep that, because you don't muck around with something that has worked as well and is so precious as a language we've inherited. People nowadays say, English belongs to all of us, it's always changing. It's not always changing, and it doesn't belong to us. We inherited this wonderful, wonderful inheritance from our ancestors who lovingly preserved and improved it, and we owe it to them and to our successors to pass it on to them intact unless improved. So any change, you've got to be absolutely sure it's a change for the better before you do it. Now, it's not really an answer to your question.
No.
So shall I try and answer your question? Finished to me. Well, just to give you an example of where things go wrong, people now no longer understand about punctuation. Now, if I was to say to you, I am having a drink now, which is very unusual, leave out any commas, and it would be an unusual thing for me to be having a drink, right? If I were to say, I am having a drink, comma, which is very unusual, it's not me having a drink that's unusual, it's that particular drink that's unusual.
Yeah.
Now, that's a very subtle difference. It's just a comma inserted or left out, but completely changes the meaning. This is my brother who lives in New York. That, without a comma, is one of two brothers. This is my brother who lives in New York, and that's my brother who lives in San Francisco. This is my brother, comma, who lives in New York. I've only got one brother.
That's right.
It's a dramatic difference. I think that's the easiest one I can think up off the top of my head. I give a lot of examples.
You certainly do. You certainly do. If you also speak a lot about correct grammar versus incorrect grammar. Is that something you could expand on a little bit for people?
Yeah, well, correct grammar, the criterion for correct grammar is it as it always has been? I mean, in other words, for instance, I've got a textbook, grammar textbook, famous professor in its day, written by William Cobbett in 1821. I've got another one, I think the first proper textbook ever done by, I think his name was Fowler in 1760 or something like that. Either of them would be perfectly good textbooks today. What you've got to find out in order to find out the correct grammar is simply what has it always been.
Yeah.
Now, in addition to that, it always has a logic. And grammarians who write their books on grammar, including me, they absolutely love working out why that particular grammar is. And I spend quite a lot of time in the book here and there saying, why there's a good use of the word hopefully, a bad use of the word hopefully, and why it is correct to say first, secondly, thirdly, rather than firstly, secondly, thirdly, and so on. There always is a lovely, and why it is wrong to split an infinitive, why we should never, ever, 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 ever split an infinitive, unless you're joking. But there's always a logical reason for these things, that sometimes the grammar books themselves don't get them right. And I quote in my book, in my bibliography at the end, I say I've got one hero who's a professor of logic who wrote a book on grammar about 20 years ago called Professor Dummett, and he is 100% reliable.
Okay.
The Economist Style Guide of today, I think I would say, is 100% reliable. But some of the famous books, who are wonderful books, like Modern English Usage by Fowler, it's a lovely book, but he's sometimes jolly careless and slipshod. And that applies to a lot of books. So there's a terrific satisfaction about being exact in your grammar, which means exact in your thinking, exact in your communication. It's deeply, deeply satisfying. Sort of one can't appreciate until one's there. Just right, one can't appreciate what it's like to be a good chess player until you actually become a good chess player.
That's a good analogy, actually. I like that.
Or indeed to be a good tennis player. I mean, someone like Andy Murray enjoys tennis much more than you and I could imagine, because he's so much better and he can do so many more things. Yeah. And you can't appreciate it until you're there, so you've just got to take it on trust.
Yes, that's right. So, what now that we've reached this point with a successful book, what next for you then? Do you have any more books?
Well, yes. ebury Press, sort of as excited as I was by this unexpected event of it, sort of going on and on and on, being the top bestsellers. Well, we've got another book that we can use, which will might work as well as this one, based on the success of this one. Mm-hmm. And so they asked me to come up with 3 or 4 different titles, and the title they have come up with, agreed on, is Gwynne's Latin.
Okay.
Which is going to come out, I think, next April, if I can get it done by the deadline. And you'll have the same sort of tone of voice, and
yep.
We hope.
That sounds fantastic. So, so apart from your book and your future book, where else can people find out more about you and your work?
I've got a website. I teach over the internet and also face-to-face up to point, but much more over the internet because it means I can be teaching one moment in California, one moment in India, and so on. As does my daughter Chloe, who is my teaching partner, and she teaches exactly the same way as I do. And we have a website which is gwynneteaching.com, which is GWYNNETEACHING, and there you can find out pretty well all that we can tell you about ourselves, and also if you want to have a lesson or two to see whether you'd like a few more, you can have a go.
That sounds brilliant. Okay.
Excited to hear from anybody. And on any subject. We teach all the sort of the academic subjects. The one we're most asked to do is Latin and English, but we will teach anything else, including traditional philosophy and of course arithmetic and French and German, and Spanish.
Are you doing that generally 1-to-1, or is that several people at one time?
What happens is it's always one-to-one screen. But we really encourage parents and grandparents to be in the room at the same time. If they want to get some people from next door in to join in the classes, we don't charge any extra. We charge our rate, no matter how many people are on the screen. where we would be much more one-to-one is if there's the family was a sort of an 8-year-old and a 12-year-old, because you can start off with both of them teaching them a mo, a mas, a mat, a mumps, a mumps, a mat, but very soon one has to separate them. But we also, in some cases, we are in charge of the entire homeschool. Some cases we teach for an hour a week. We just vary according to what, and we obviously also did in order to fit in with what the person wants. So we are completely flexible. We just want to do what's most helpful.
Absolutely. Okay, well, thank you very much again for speaking to us at whichenglish.com, and thank you very much.
It's a pleasure. And this is all going to appear online one of these days, isn't it?
Absolutely, online on the internet. So that I'll send you a link to that.